The jet sliced through the dark sky unnoticed by radar, its course locked to a destination erased from modern maps below. The world remained unaware of the storm rising above them, unaware that a team long believed scattered, broken, or dead was coming. Back together, led by a woman whose name still echoed in the silence of lost files. They called her Echo One, and those who had served beside her never forgot, not the silence of her movements, not the precision of her orders, not the way she brought people back even when the odds laughed and their facility landed in the highlands, surrounded by snow, mist, and silence. A concrete shell half buried in the earth marked the entrance to the outpost, its old code pad still humming weakly against the cold. Her fingers moved across the keys, entering a sequence no one should have remembered, and yet the door opened not with resistance, but as though it had been waiting for her. The lights inside flickered to life, casting shadows across dust-coated gear still arranged as if the team had left moments ago, not years. By one the ghosts arrived, some by air, some on foot, none by accident. Ramirez stepped through with a quiet nod, face hardened by exile. Cruz followed with eyes that had seen too much. Jacobs emerged from the forest, his silence heavier than his gear, each of them marked not just by tattoos but by the weight of missions abandoned and promises unkept. They said little as they unpacked and prepared. The silence between them held more meaning than words could carry. Their trust in her remained unshaken despite the years, despite the lies told about her. False gathered them in the old command room, its screens flickering with updates pulled from intercepted feeds and backdoor intel. Her voice was low, steady, and without pretense. She told them of the target, not a nation, not a general, but a network, a shadow operation grown in the vacuum left when their unit was disbanded, using their own tactics, their own strategies against innocent lives. It was personal because it was their legacy corrupted, and now it had to end. Jacobs laid out the infiltration route. Cruz marked the fallback zones. Ramirez calibrated the drones. They worked in sync like muscle memory pulled from the depths of instinct, not needing reminders, not needing reassurance. They had followed her once into the impossible, and they would do it again without question. As the snow fell outside and the wind howled against the walls, the fire inside them reignited. Years of silence washed away by the rhythm of a mission worth fighting for. They were no longer just ghosts, they were soldiers with purpose, and she their anchor, the one who had returned from the silence not to reclaim glory but to finish what was stolen from them. The clock ticked down to 0 hour, and no one flinched, no one doubted, because they knew the truth now. She was not an imposter, she was not a relic, she was the last living seal from the classified unit Phoenix. And she had come not just to remind the world who they were, but to erase the threat that dared rise. And their placid wind screamed through the mountain pass as they moved under cover of night, cloaked in darkness and silence, each of them slipping through terrain like it was home. Their breathing shallow, steps calculated, eyes locked forward. No words passed between them. They no longer needed them. The plan was etched into their bodies, rehearsed through years of pain, betrayal, and memory. They had trained for chaos, and now they were walking directly into it, not as ghosts, but as vengeance made flesh. They reached the perimeter at 0300 hours. The compound sat nestled between cliff walls, illuminated by scattered floodlights, patrolled by hired guns pretending to be soldiers. Echo One signaled a halt, her hand slicing the air like a blade. She pointed left, and Ramirez broke off, moving like shadow, while Cruz set up high with a scope and silence. Jacobs remained beside her, checking their comms one last time before switching to dead silence. Only signals, no voices. From here on out, Shay moved with him into the belly of the facility, bypassing motion sensors, ducking under thermal sweeps, tracing old architecture hidden beneath modern steel. This base had been built on their blueprints, twisted by those who never understood what they had meant, who had seen only weapons and not the oath behind them. Inside, they found the servers glowing with the pulse of stolen data, missions sabotaged, agents, betrayed soldiers, erased names, wiped clean except one, hers, and beside it a directive: eliminate on sight. Stared at the screen and blinking as Jacobs inserted the virus, a code she had written herself years ago when betrayal was Still unthinkable, the files began to bleed out, collapsing under their own secrets, and above them alarms screamed as the system tried to fight back. The facility roared to life. Boots echoed down the corridors, men shouting orders, unaware they were already too late, unaware that Phoenix had Ramirez met them in the hallway, a line of bodies left behind him, breath steady, eyes clear. Cruz called out 2 guards down from the tar, back up en route 10 minutes and closing fast. Echo 1 led then down the main corridor toward the extraction point, heart pounding not from fear but from clarity. This was their moment, the reason they had survived, the reason she had endured silence, disgrace, chains. Oliveth blast caught them near the junction, a shockwave of fire and steel throwing them apart. Ramirez took the brunt, shielding Cruz, who rolled to cover bleeding but alive. Jacobs dragged him behind crates, returning fire with a calm only war could breed. Echo 1 rose slowly, ears ringing, shoulder torn, uniform shredded, but eyes focused. She charged forward, not away, rifle drawn, pulse steady, weaving through fire and death toward the man at the end of the corridor. Stood calm, suited, clean, untouched by the war he had funded. His smile arrogant, his words cold, but she heard none of them. She saw only the insignia on his collar stolen from the unit he dismantled, and as she raised her weapon, her voice finally broke the silence. You erased us, but you could never kill what? You do not understand. Own shot echoed through the halls, and history shifted again. Sound of the shot still echoed in her mind long after the corridor had fallen. Silent smoke curling through the dim light, and footsteps now the only thing she heard. Steady, calm, deliberate. Her team gathered behind her, blooded but breathing, each of them marked by the battle, by memory, by the truth they carried that could no longer be denied. The man who had orchestrated their downfall lay still at her feet, the stolen insignia burned into his chest, a symbol of everything they had lost and now reclaimed. Jax checked the server bank one last time, the data destroyed, the virus complete, no trace left behind, nothing the world could twist, nothing they could weaponize against another Echo unit. Again he nodded to her, a silent confirmation that their part was done. Ramirez limped forward, arms slung in a makeshift bandage, grinning through pain. Cruz held the rear, scanning the corridor, watching for shadows that might follow, but there were none. They were alone now, truly alone, with only the weight of what came next pressing down. The move to extraction, the sky beginning to glow faintly with the first hints of dawn. Helicopters churned the air above, their signal received, confirmed, and answered with silence and motion. 2 birds dropping fast onto the cliffs above, one for them, one for the evidence. Echo 1 turned to the team, eyes scanning each of them with something deeper than gratitude, something closer to home. They had been hunted, dishonored, betrayed, but never broken, never truly gonius. The rotors kicked up dust and rock. She paused at the edge of the cliff, looking back at the facility, now dark and crumbling. The fire had spread, the records had burned, the secrets had drowned in their own lies. She traced a finger to the emblem on her own chest, the tattoo that had once marked her for shame, now a seal of truth, of legacy, of those who came before her, those who were watching now from somewhere far above. The lifted off, rising into a sky that no longer felt like a prison, but a promise, a place where they could exist again, not as ghosts, not as fugitives, but as what they always had been, warriors bound by something far older than orders, deeper than rank, something written in scars and silence and sacrifice. When they landed back on base, the hangar was empty except for one figure, an admiral, old and worn but still standing straight as steel, his eyes locked on hers, not with suspicion but recognition. He stepped forward slowly, then stopped 2 feet away and raised his hand in salute, a gesture not given lightly and never without reason. He did not speak, only nodded once, then turned and walked away, leaving silence in his wake. Word spread fast, but none of them spoke to the press, none of them sought medals or interviews. They disappeared back into the folds of service, into the silence where they belonged, their mission complete, their honor reclaimed, their names still classified, their truth now whispered, not shouted, for the ones who knew, for the ones who remember. Reddened somewhere in a quiet corner of the base, a new file began to form, not erased, not hidden, a name returned, a symbol restored, and below it one line: she was never gone, she was always real. She walked into the recruiting office with steady steps, her posture quiet but unmistakably firm, her clothes plain, her hair tied back, no insignia, no ID, nothing official, and yet something about her presence made the youngest clerk glance up from his desk. Confused, maybe curious, she asked to speak to the commander, her voice low but clear. Said it was important, said it was personal. The clerk asked for her name. She gave only a first name and said the rest was classified, which made him laugh and wave for the MPS. A few minutes later, she was handcuffed, placed in a holding chair, while two officers whispered near the door. She had no documentation, no active record, and yet she had walked straight in like she owned the place. When they asked her what unit she claimed, she hesitated for a breath and said Echo Team, which made the junior officer snort. Said that unit was disbanded 5 years ago after a mission went south in the Northern Territories. He asked again who she was. She simply said, check the tattoo. They didn't. They laughed. One of them said it was probably a prison tat. Said girls like her show up twice a year with stories and scars trying to play hero. The other joked about calling the news, maybe making it a viral prank. The cuffs stayed tight around her wrists, and she said nothing else. She waited, eyes fixed on the ceiling like she was counting the holes in the tiles or trying to forget something they couldn't see. The third officer stepped in, older, his rank higher and his voice sharper. He asked why she was there. She told him she needed to speak with Admiral Keene privately about something that couldn't wait, something he would understand. The officer raised an eyebrow, asked if she was threatening him. She shook her head and said, no, sir, I'm trying to save your people. The room fell into silence for a long beat before the older officer gave the order to call the Admiral, thinking it was a waste of time but following protocol. When Keene arrived 20 minutes later, no one expected what happened next. He stepped into the room, paused when he saw her, then his eyes dropped to the inner part of her left forearm. He stared without moving, his face drained of color, and all at once the noise and tension vanished. He walked over slowly, motioned for the cuffs to be removed, then did something none of them expected. He stood in full posture and saluted her. The room froze, not understanding why a decorated admiral was honoring a woman who was, until moments ago, accused of impersonating a Navy SEAL. Keene said one thing that echoed through the stillness: that tattoo is real, and that means she's the reason any of you are still breathing. The air inside the room turned thick with questions, but no one dared to speak as the Admiral took a slow breath and motioned for her to follow him down the corridor. The younger officer, still stunned, barely noticed the way she moved, like a shadow, like someone used to silent corridors and tension soaked walls. They entered a secured room with walls lined in classified briefings and old photos, and when the door closed behind them, Keene turned and looked at her for a long time. His voice was soft when he asked what happened after Courage. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she placed a single black flash drive on the table and said, the mission they buried is not over, sir, and it never was. She pulled up her sleeve to show the faded mark burned into her skin, a tattoo so distinct only a handful of people knew what it meant, and even fewer survived long enough to talk about it. He recognized it, of course, the emblem of a unit that had no name in public records, the kind of group created in the margins of war for operations that were never supposed to exist. Echo Team had disappeared in the official logs, wiped clean 5 years ago after a mission deep in foreign territory went dark and never returned. The files claimed all hands lost. She had been declared Kia with the rest, but here she was alive, wearing the same eyes that saw things no one talked about. Keene sank into the chair beside her, his face marked with old regret and responsibility, and he asked why now, why come back after so long, and she told him, they're still out there, sir, the people we went after, they're still operating, and they're planning something big. She told him she had been hiding, moving between shadows, living off radar because someone high up had burned the team, and if they knew she was alive, they'd come after her. Keene looked at the flash drive and asked what's on it, and she said evidence, movements, communications, and something worse. Someone inside this base is feeding them information. The Admiral stared at her, then asked if she was sure, and her answer was cold, deadly yes, and they're expecting an attack within 72 hours. If we don't act, people will die. She had tracked the patterns, followed the intel, learned to read their signals like a second language. Her years off the grid were not spent hiding, they were spent preparing. Keen nodded slowly and asked how he could help. She said, activate Phoenix Protocol and bring back the team, the real team, the ones who made it out and went underground there. Scattered, but they're listening, waiting for a signal, and Keen asked who will lead them this time, and she looked him in the eye and said, I will, sir, this time we finish what we started. No more silence, no more ghosts. Word spread quickly across the base, though none of it made it to official channels. No emails, no records, no names, just tension in the halls and glances exchanged between officers who knew something was about to break wide open, while the official story painted her as a fraud. Her silent walk beside the Admiral told another story, one the older veterans recognized from the way she scanned rooms, from how she didn't flinch at the sound of rotor blades outside or the click of boots behind her. She moved like someone who had survived the kind of operations no one talked about, not in war stories, not even in nightmaresque. Brought her to the lower levels of the base, where old call signs still echoed on concrete walls and ghosts of missions past seemed to breathe. From the dust sealed behind steel doors, she keyed in a code known only to 3 people in the country, and lights flickered to life, revealing rows of files, maps, mission gear, and screens frozen on last known coordinates of people once thought lost. She stepped forward and began calling names into the encrypted system, each name a memory, each memory a scar. She sent pings to secure channels, messages coded in old team slang that only a real ghost would understand, the kind of language that spoke of shared blood and unfinished business. Within hours, the signals began to return one by one, simple codes, at first acknowledgments, then confirmations, then finally readiness. There was Ramirez, last seen crossing the border through a collapsed tunnel 6 years ago, then Cruz, who had vanished into the storm during an off-book jungle extraction. Even Jacobs, whose exit was marked by an explosion caught on satellite footage, now replying with 3 words loud and clear: Phoenix lives. Meanwhile, outside the room, the base grew uneasy. The officers who had mocked her now avoided her eyes. The younger ones whispered about the Admiral's sudden change in posture the moment he saw her tattoo, how his salute had seemed more like apology than command. How the woman they tried to arrest now had full access to systems no one dared question, and orders flowing from her terminal signed with her old call sign Echo 1 Reborn. By nightfall, she stood on the tarmac as a jet prepared for Black Ops transport. The team would converge at an abandoned comms outpost in the Highlands, remote, cold, unreachable by standard surveillance, the kind of place ghosts returned to when the world forgot them. She wore no standard uniform, just black tactical, and her silent stare. Her only badge was the mark on her arm, now freshly inked to cover the old faded lines, with new clarity assigned to her team that she was still who she used to be, that the mission was back on. And as the engines roared to life and the night swallowed her flight, the base watched from behind closed blinds, some saluting in silence, others simply trying to understand how someone they thought was a myth was now leading the most classified reactivation since the Cold War, and none of them knew what was coming, but she did. She always had.